Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Emergency service dispatchers, what's the scariest call you've ever gotten? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. One of the first calls I ever took. Woman calls up and asks about the process of filing a restraining order. She discusses how her boyfriend has been abusive and controlling. Mid-conversation, the doorbell rings. She puts me on hold, opens the door, and I hear yelling. Guy barges in and starts beating on her, and I'm sitting there helpless listening because I didn't have her address yet. Luckily, I did have her name, and within a few minutes, we got her address and got help to her. She was pretty badly injured but lived, and he is still in jail. This call made me doubt myself and if I was in the right profession, but I stuck with it, and it has been a very rewarding, though sometimes sad profession. Was a 911 operator for 10 years. Scariest is probably different than worst. My scariest was an active shooter in a high-rise, just sitting on the line trying to give the best direction so everyone makes it out okay. I think the most genuine terror comes from child callers. I had this 5-year-old call in that her dad was growling and wouldn't wake up. Okay. Agonal breathing, probably a heart attack, scrambling to get a confirmed address for EMS. PD dispatch to unconfirmed address. Finally confirm the address and start giving directions on CPR. Nope, she will not touch him because she is scared, then bursts into tears. Luckily, PD arrived just after she refused, and they were able to do CPR until EMS arrived. When I was younger, I applied to be a 911 operator for the city I was living in Northern California. I got through most of their tests and interviews, which there were numerous. The pool of applicants was over 200 for about 8 positions. I got down to the last dozen applicants, then they played some recordings for us. The recording I listened to was a young girl calling 911 from inside a closet. She was crying and hysterical, saying that her dad was in the house with a gun and was going to kill her mom. You could hear the mother screaming in the background, and the operator was really calm and collected. She got the little girl to keep her voice down and whisper, and tried to keep her on the line. You could hear the gunshots in the background. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I didn't want to find out what happened next, so I don't know the outcome. I knew I couldn't handle that then. I don't think I could take something like that now. I work for a sheriff's office, and a good friend of mine was a dispatcher. I stepped outside one day for a smoke, and my buddy was standing there shaking and crying. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that he had just dispatched a call for his best friend. His friend was a former army sniper and had only been out for a few months. He was a volunteer firefighter and was responding to a house fire, rolled the truck, and had been decapitated. Guy had 5 young daughters. Tragic that this is, it would make for a compelling story. I mean, imagine it. You work and live in a town of 500 people, and you're the one person they call for help. You probably know everyone. Frightening. Call came in and was flagged as a frequent caller on the ASS end of a very rural county. The dude was just screaming. We couldn't make out anything he was saying, but we had his address and sent every available unit we had. After a while, the screaming started to die down and his breathing got very labored. He wouldn't talk to us, but he just kept muttering. After a few minutes, we realized he was praying. A few minutes later, deputy arrived on scene, heard him check in on scene, and also heard him on the line. First noise I heard was him vomiting. Turned out, the dude had been working on his car, and the lift collapsed. The guy wasn't under the car, but was between it and a tree when the car started rolling. He was impaled on a branch and pinned between the tree and car. Dude lived. He's a quadriplegic, but he's alive. First legit 911 call he ever made, and everyone took their sweet time getting there because it was usually nonsense. Not a dispatcher, but a paramedic. But a man called saying his mom had severe chest pains, so we head over to their address in a hurry. However, there was no mom, just the caller waiting for us and then robbing us at gunpoint, saying we were going to kill us. He just wanted the drugs, but was quite shocking still, always going through my mind when entering some shady neighborhood. One that always sticks with me is the guy who phoned to tell me he'd shot himself in the head. He was slurring his words and sounded drunk, but no, he'd actually shot himself in the head and was dead by the time the crew got there. That was a weird one to get my head around, haha. I also took a call from a 15-year-old kid who came home from school to find his dad hanging, so I had to basically ask him if he was cold, could he cut him down, all the usual while this poor kid was panicking to hell. And then the kid stops answering my questions, and the dispatcher next to me gets the emergency call from the neighbors saying they don't know what's going on, but there's a kid standing in the street just screaming. I think about that poor kid a lot, and I absolutely detest his father for doing that to him, when he knew his son would be the one who'd find him. Probably the other one that stands out is a call from the woman who'd just been raped. She'd been coming home from a club, and someone had pushed through her door behind her as she unlocked it. When he left, she called me. I still remember the way she screamed when she heard knocking on her door again, and I had to yell at her to try and make her understand it was the police and not the guy coming back. I didn't sleep well after that night shift at all. I am an emergency helicopter dispatcher, so I get calls from EMS in rural areas. The first question I always ask is, what is the closest city to the scene? I swear 80% of these people do not know how to pronounce it correctly, and 50% of them do not know how to spell it. One time this guy cut his dick off on bath salts. When he came to, he realized what he did and called us directly. There was an accident once on a somewhat busy state road here. An older couple in an SUV pulled out onto the road without seeing a motorcyclist that was going well over 100 miles per hour. He rear-ended them, died instantly, and plowed through the SUV, landing halfway through the windshield. The SUV flipped a couple times and landed on the passenger side, trapping the wife. Then it caught fire. At my dispatch center, we had 3 of us working at all times, and I don't even know how many 911 calls we instantly got when this happened. Dozens, I'm sure. After I sent the FD and they got on the way, this was a rural area and the intersection was probably a good 10 minutes south of them, some bystanders managed to get the husband out of the SUV, but he died in the helicopter on the way to the hospital, I believe. The wife burned alive. Honestly, the worst part was right after I dispatched the fire department, one of the lieutenants on the biggest police department in my county happened to be driving through there with his family and he called 911. I'll never forget how panicked and frantic he was on the call. I had never heard any of our officers like that before, let alone one of the administrators. We were pretty friendly with all of them, so it shook me up. After I hung up with him, I just started sobbing. 911 dispatcher here for a large city. I get a little bit of everything, and mostly it's BS, but one that stuck with me was something recently. A man called in frantic, and it was really hard to get him to calm down. He told me his 35-year-old girlfriend was unresponsive and not breathing. I immediately started giving this guy CPR instructions, and he kept screaming, I'm sorry, my love." Tough morning for the guy, no doubt. It hit me that he could have been responsible, or the last thing he ever said to her was not pleasant. Never followed up on the call. In this line of work, it's on to the next one. Too busy to think about it. I have millions of people depending on me, and not to let the last call affect the next one. I don't know what happened other than she was a DOA. Didn't hit me until the next day. My God, that scream was deafening. All I know is there was more to the story. I could hear it in his voice. P.S. I've heard people shot in real time, parents trying to revive their dead kids first thing in the morning. But this, for some reason, hit me. Caller. Muffled voice. Me. I can't understand you. What's the location of the emergency? Caller. Sounding clearer, like Kermit the Frog. Gives address. I'm going to hang myself. Me. Sir, we can help you. Talk to me. What's been happening? Caller. I just want you to move my body before my family gets back. Me. Please, there's nothing that can't be... Crack. Gargling silence. I had to stay on the line until I heard police on scene. He had a hands-free kit on. I wasn't even allowed 5 minutes break. I had a breakdown after. I can't describe those sounds. Haunts me to this day. I cannot describe the feeling of being so intimately involved in the moment of such a traumatic death. He gave his pain to me. My sister works as a dispatcher. Her first week on the job, she had a man call in saying he was going to kill himself. He told her that she couldn't do anything to change his mind. He was simply trying to let her know where he could be found. She heard the gunshot through the call. Second one, she had a little girl call in because her dad was unresponsive. She knew that CPR would likely save this man, but the daughter wasn't grown enough and didn't have the strength to perform it effectively. My sister had to tell her to leave the room, because the longer the girl stayed in there trying fruitlessly to save her father, the more scared she would become by the experience of watching her father die. I worked as a deaf relay operator, 611, so we would often get 911 calls when people dialed the number wrong. We have to stay on the call and get them to 911 and can't leave until the call is concluded. Guy is super tired trying to catch a few winks on the side of Interstate 5 when a car pulls up behind him and people jump out and try to get in the car. He drives off and calls 911 and the car follows. They're speeding down the road and he's giving the dispatcher the name of every exit he's just passed. He's saying the car is still behind him and at times trying to pull side by side. He's scared shitless. I'm on the edge of my seat. The call drops. I was an alarm dispatcher for about a year. The scariest I had was during the night shift. I had a woman whose alarm went off while she and her daughter were asleep. She grabbed her daughter and ran into her room and locked the door. She had a gun. The woman said she did not know why it went off and requested we dispatch the police. Protocol for the company I was with was for us to stay on the line with them for a while. A seat neighbor called the police for us. About 30 seconds after we began the call for the police, she said the door handle was being jiggled from the outside and stopped after a few attempts. She kept saying she was going to go out there no matter how many times I told her to stay in the room. Last 30 seconds of the call, she was not responding. I hung up with her and called the police back and asked what was going on. They advised that police were on scene. Worst part about that job was not knowing what happened after we hung up. Glad I'm not there anymore. My late wife was a 911 dispatcher for 15 years. The two worst I remember her telling me of were a call she didn't answer but was on duty during and heard the playback of. A woman called that her ex-boyfriend was breaking into her house and he then beat her to death with a hammer, all of which was heard on the phone. When they were hearing it, they weren't sure what it was but found out when the officers arrived. The second was when she was doing EMS calls. A man had recently had surgery on his legs and was unable to get up out of bed or his recliner by himself. He calls because his wife is having a heart attack on the other side of the room and he can't do anything to help her. She said listening to him begging for help was the worst thing she ever had to sit through. Imagining the horror of that realization, having the ability to help under normal circumstances, but then become bedridden just watching someone you love suffer and unable to help is horror realized. My mother worked dispatch and got a call from a woman whose husband had locked in a trailer and lit it on fire. The windows had been boarded up and there was no way for her to get out. This was in the 90s, so landline, and the call cut out when the cord started to burn. By the time fire and police arrived, it was too late. The best she got was from a woman who was very active labor. My mom had to talk her and her teenage daughter through delivering the baby. By the time EMS got there, they had a healthy baby boy. One of the scariest, most memorable calls was probably when I had to stay on the phone with the father of a barricaded subject, Army vet, while they relayed to me what they were able to see through the in-home security footage. The wife of the subject left, went to the house of the father of the barricaded subject without telling the subject because she saw him, the subject, standing over their baby girl with a gun the day before. We had to put out an all-points bulletin to notify the surrounding area that he left the house at one point, possibly going to find his wife and daughter. He went back home and started tearing the house up and smashing things. I had to hear from my officers that he was shooting at them from inside his house. Eventually, we got him out without anyone getting injured. I ended up having to be on the phone for a solid 4.5 hours, unable to hang up and unable to go to the restroom or leave when my shift ended. I tried to block out the calls that I listened to people kill themselves and others. Not a dispatcher, but one told me that one time he got a call from a 19-year-old girl. It was late, and she was new to driving in the US. Her car slipped on black ice and went over the bridge. Her car sank in the river and she called 911 and he received it. He tried to keep her calm. Poor girl was an au pair from same country in Africa. She was crying because she was going to die in a foreign country, and to make things worse, she didn't even know where she was. They couldn't find her fast enough. The dispatch even remembers her last words. "Tell my sister I'm sorry I left." The story haunts me to this day. And I'm also an au pair. Obligatory, not an emergency dispatcher. I had a conversation with one once where we discussed his craziest work stories, and his was taking the call of a man who had just drowned his 2 small daughters in a lake near their house. He had to stay on the phone with this sociopath, asking him questions about the time and the location of the murders until the police arrived to take him into custody. He never did find out if they ever found the children or if either of them survived in the end. I've come into contact with a fair number of sexual predators and child molesters in my line of work, but I never had to interact with them immediately after their crimes and press them for details. It's a lot to ask of someone. I've always had a lot of respect for emergency dispatchers and the folks who run abuse, rape, and suicide hotlines. Nearing the end of a rather uneventful night shift, I took a call from a young lady who frantically announced that she was going into labor. There was nobody there with her. Her apartment door was locked, and it was apparent that delivery was imminent. Childbirth calls are quite rare for emergency medical dispatchers. They are said to be once-in-a-career occurrences. We are nonetheless trained for this, so when the call does come, we're prepared to help the caller through delivery of the baby. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was helping a would-be mother deliver her own baby. Thankfully, by the time I finished obtaining all the geo-validation information and pertinent medical history, a few minutes into the call, I could hear someone knocking on her door. It was her sister, but she couldn't get in because the door was locked. The caller insisted she was not able to go unlock the door on account of her being in active labor. I managed to convince her to crawl to the door to let the person in, and she painstakingly did so while voicing her discomfort in the form of various moans, grunts, and profanities. She finally let the other person in and handed the phone to the visitor, relieved because now I know what to do. I started providing the preparatory instructions: gather pillows, towels, blankets, removing clothing from the waist down, etc. But there was no time for prep. That baby was coming, and it was coming now. "Oh my god, the head is out," I remember hearing, followed by her shrieking, oh shit, the cord is wrapped around the neck." I instructed her to attempt to loosen the cord and slip it over the head, and she was able to. Within moments, baby was born. But baby was limp, blue, and not breathing. After what felt like minutes, but was like only a few seconds, I decided to advise the caller that she would need to start doing chest compressions. Thankfully, before any of that started, I could hear the reassuring sound of a baby crying on the other end of the phone. With excitement in her voice, she announced that baby was moving, and the color was improving. It was a baby boy, and he was alive. The paramedics arrived, and I congratulated the caller before disconnecting the call. By this time, it was past the end of the shift, and the day crew had logged on at all the desks except mine. Instead of going home, the night crew had gathered around my desk to watch me take this call. After disconnecting, I was met with cheers from my colleagues. During my next shift, I was informed that the baby was healthy, and I was presented with a congratulatory letter and a little blue stork pin. See, it doesn't have to all be doom and gloom. A little bit of sunshine and a happy ending are a welcomed relief for a subject like this. Congratulations to everyone involved. A few stand out, but the first one that comes to mind was a young woman who called in because she was hearing noises outside at night. I got her address and information. She was relatively calm at this point, but a few seconds later, she saw there was someone outside in her yard coming up onto her porch. She's getting more and more freaked out. I'm telling her PD is already on the way. I've taken dozens of calls like this, and usually once they realize someone is awake, they run off. This guy didn't. There was a loud crash. She starts this high-pitched scream and stops responding to me on the phone. Turns out the guy smashed through her front window. She dropped the phone and ran to the bathroom. PD got on scene quickly, thank God, and found the guy still hung up in the window. She was okay, just freaked out. He went to jail, but that crash and scream are sounds that stick with you. You kind of become numb to the things after a while. What would be scary for most people is just normal for most of us. It's a stressful job, and at our agency, we both take the calls and work the radio at the same time. So sometimes you may take 100 to 200 calls in a shift. It's impossible to remember them all, so the ones that do are usually either really bad or really funny.